Okay, so PW here, guys. Cheap HDMI cable. This is basically what you're gonna see. Yep. I know it can be annoying, particularly when playing a video game like this. But imagine, sit down with a new girlfriend and watching a movie for the first time on Netflix, say together, and this starts happening. What would you do? Shit, you'd have to run out and get a brand new HDMI cable of higher quality than the one you've got already, of course. But yeah, look at this. This is what a cheap HDMI cable will do. Let me quickly start to explain that. I've tested a number of different things out. I understand exactly what this is and why it's doing this. It's not the source material. This is a PlayStation 4 game, as you probably already understood. It's not the PlayStation 4 console. It's not the video game. It's not the television. It's not the receiver. It's the cable. And the way I know that is because, well, it doesn't do that with the more expensive AudioQuest cables. Now, let's pay attention to something here while it's doing this. Let's note the fact that the game is still playing, of course, right? But we're getting consistent audio. Which could tell us something else, too, in addition. It could tell us that it's either the TV. It doesn't seem like it'd be the game, because if it were the game, most likely the audio would be breaking in and out. If it were the receiver, the audio would be breaking in and out. So, yeah, that tells us it could be the TV. Highly unlikely. This is a brand new Sony Bravia XBR Series 4K TV. With less than, 8 months use on it. So, it's not the TV. But let's see here, like when we do this. When we go into the menu of this video game, it's weird because it doesn't do it. Now, I know why it's doing this, but to fill you in on why it's doing it, now let's go back to the game real quick. Let's just, get in back into it real quick, and see that it's doing it again. Not as aggressively, but, oh, there you go. It's cutting in and out. That tells us one thing. Tells me one thing. You might think, well, yeah, that's the game, man. I mean, when you get back into the game, it seems to be having discrepancies. It seems to be screwing up. But what that is it's the signal that's being sent through this HDMI cable it's not bottlenecking. It's tanking out, so to speak. There's not enough bore through the pipe, so to speak, almost. It's like pushing too much air through an exhaust pipe on a vehicle that can't, the size of the pipe isn't big enough. It needs more air to breathe. So what this comes down to is the fact that this video game has high dynamic range, right? It's the most popular video game almost in the world right now. And it's got high dynamic range, right? The high dynamic range, well, here you can see by, if I hit info, if we can get a frickin' screen to show up here. I'd have to switch the inputs on my receiver. Yeah, I guess here, that's a good way. To show you that it's not the receiver, bam, I'm going to go switch the input real quick, right? And show you. Pay attention to the yellow. I'm going to go back to this real quick. Now pay attention to the yellow of the info and speakers that were active. Much different color now, because the game uses high dynamic range. One of the problems is when using a cheap HDMI cable, they'll claim they can pass high dynamic range through, and they can, without problems sometimes. So, let's understand something here. A cable that can pass 4K Ultra HD high dynamic range, 18 gig a second, they will work, and oftentimes work without problem. However, when it comes to you're sending a ton of bandwidth, ton of signal, a ton of properties through on that signal, then the cable starts to compromise. As I said before, the audio wasn't cutting in and out, right? It was just the video. What that is when you're sending through that much video signal, a high dynamic range, not a true native 4K signal, but when I get it on my TV, by the time it leaves the receiver, it's in a 4K signal, right? I'm not playing a 4K video game, but it's in 4K almost. It's upscaled, right? Which to me looks just as good. This game looks damn good in 4K. Or, I mean, even in 1080p. But when you got a 4K TV and you're upscaling it through a great receiver with that video processor to 4K, shit looks amazing, right? But when you're sending a... There I am. There's me. Check that out. That was a great kill, too. By the way, it's Army 171 Infantry, if you'd like to add me on a PlayStation Network or something. But when you send a ton of signal, particularly the video, the audio doesn't much matter. You're not going to max out almost any HDMI cable on the market with audio signal, but with the video signal, this is where the ISF standards start to come into play. I would direct you to a website that I'm familiar with. Here, in fact, I'll get it up for us real quick. The ISF standards website that deals with pipeline, right? Diameter of the pipe that you're sending things through. HDMI cables all have 19 pins. There's a lot of information to send over an HDMI cable, right? It's the video that starts to compromise the cable, or the cable starts to get compromised, so to speak, when you're sending a ton of video signal through it. Audio, like I said, doesn't much matter, but the video signal, when you're maxing that video signal out, you are literally putting that HDMI cable to full throttle, full bore. It is maxing itself out, it's redlining, and it starts to screw up like that. It starts to have problems. Let me just say, some of the most common problems you're going to have, at least that I've seen. I'm no TV calibrator. I'm no, engineer with any of these products. I'm an electrical engineer myself. However, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, right? However, the video signals through these things, when you max these HDMI cables out, and a lot of them aren't maxed out, believe me. They're set at 18 gig. Some can handle 16, 17, 18. 18's the max. A lot of times you're not sending that much signal through. I can tell you this. These video games, especially like the PlayStation 4 Pro Enhanced video games, and some of the newer Xbox games, I don't know if they're in 4K on the Xbox, but some of those newer games, those push a ton through. Ultra HD Blu-ray, yeah, that's probably the second, but these video games have a high refresh rate. You're moving around a lot. There's a lot of video signal to go through on these video games, and that's what maxes these cables out. That, honestly, is what really puts an added extra strain or load on those HDMI cables. And I hope this was a decent illustration as to how it happens, or what happens, essentially, when you push a ton of information through. When we start to get into the 4K Ultra HD high dynamic range content, there you are pushing a ton of information on those 19 pins. And some of them, the cheaper ones, can't handle it. Okay. Here is an example of a cheap HDMI cable. For the longest time, I've had no problem whatsoever with this HDMI cable. In fact, I've even sent a 4K Ultra HD high dynamic range signal out of the Oppo UDP-203 Blu-ray player with a 4K Ultra HD high dynamic range Blu-ray into a display, right? Into my Sony TVs, no problem. Epson projector, no problem. And it's super long, right? This is a 20-foot long cable. Cheap, though. Now, it's not the one I was just using there. I'll show you that in a second, but I think it might surprise you. This cable, let's take a look at the manufacturer of this one. Fine cable, right? However, there's one problem with this cable. Let's see, so Aurum. A-U-R-U-M. Now, this cable is aesthetically in fine shape. Let's see if we can get focusing on that. It's focusing in on the background shit there. There we go. Aesthetically, appearance-wise, this cable appears to have no issue whatsoever. All right. Well, there is a problem. What's the problem, you ask me? It simply doesn't work. Yes, I've reached out to this company. I've emailed them saying, look, would you like me to put a YouTube video on showing that your cable simply doesn't function at all, audio or video-wise, sends no signal whatsoever through now? And they just didn't even respond. So, small company, shitty, don't ever deal with them. I bought this on Amazon for sending a picture through to my projector. That's why I had to have it so long. Yes, I know we run into problems when the HDMI cables get long like this, but this worked fine in the past. At my other property, it worked fine. I get it here, this property, I plug it in, doesn't work at all. Let's take a look at the HDMI cable that was just causing that problem in the video game, though. By the way, before we get into that, before I show you which cable simply does that, I want to get into the fact that I just showed you a 20-foot long cable, right? This is also the same exact length of a monster cable. It's kind of a lower end monster too. I've got all different series of the monster cables, but I'll look for the exact model of it as we, if we can here. But this cable has no problem in place of that red one, right? Same length. Old cable, mind you, too. But no problem with it. So let's take a look at what the model number, if we can, just so you guys have an understanding of which monster. Because there's so many damn monster cables out there. Which monster I'm talking about here. Okay, I'm going to turn it around there, but... Okay, it's the 800 HD. Advanced high-speed HDMI cable, right? Directional, or now double helix, it says. Construction, I know it's upside down, but... Yeah, no problem with this cable, right? Absolutely no problem whatsoever. In place of that red one, the red one won't work at all. This one will. Let's take a look at another monster HDMI cable. Great cables, lower end cable, but this is the problem with this one. By the way, that cable works just fine. I'm just setting down here for the time being. This one obviously doesn't work at all. It won't show picture or audio whatsoever. However, before it got this damaged, it actually did work. So the monster cables, I have nothing bad to say. Anything about them. They work pretty great. I don't know how this happened, mind you, but it happened. It got physically damaged, and it can't continue to make that same connection. So it just simply won't work anymore. But this cable was still damaged a bit and actually continued to work. So I gotta say, the monster cables, you can damage them, and they'll continue to work a lot of times. This one is so damaged that it, physically won't make contact with that last pin over there on that side, but the monsters are great. And they, they won't pass the 4K high dynamic range through, but they work. Now, okay, before I show you the cable that I was using, let's just talk about why it won't pass a 4K high dynamic range signal through, or at least what will happen if you try to do that. You get no signal. You get no video signal. A lot of times that can happen too, where the video game kind of cuts in and out, or the content will cut in and out, but let's see what we're talking about first. All right, another example. Very good HDMI cable. Old, mind you. This has got to be HDMI 1.4, right? I haven't even tried the 4K content on it. I got a ton of monster cables, by the way. But this cable does great. Nice and short.